All right, guys. Before we go on with our next steps with what to do with your contour line drawing that you should have that looks something like this, I want to just admit something to you. I forgot to tell you, and I'm just using the small piece of paper because that's where I started the process. But you should be doing this work where you take those underlying shapes and modify them to the contours on the bigger picture that you drew inside the rectangle. So I'll use the one that is for my second period class. So here's my view of the underlying shapes of my pepper mill, the pepper grinder, right? And I redrew the underlying shapes inside the 1-inch border on this. The next step is to modify those underlying shapes into its contours. Now we haven't done that in my second period class yet, so I haven't shown them on this piece of paper. But don't be doing that on this one. I want you to keep the small practice as the underlying shapes. And all the work that you do with the contours is on this paper with the border. It's about the same size and everything, maybe a little bit bigger, but it should be all adjusted on the final one, right? Because that's where we're doing all of the work. So you can see with mine, I kept it on the small one, and that's because that's the one I was working on for the pre-work, and then I just added to it this last time for the next steps. And I shouldn't have done that. I should have shown taking it from this paper to the bigger piece of paper with the borders that you draw, and redrawing them in underlying shapes. But as you can see now, I've got my my contours drawn in place, right? So the contours that I see on the bottle, the curves and the changes in direction on the surface, like this direction change right here, it's coming this way at one edge and then turns and goes downward. So it's coming out straight and then turns curving downward to this face. So all of those are done on the bigger paper, but you can see I've done it on the practice paper. All right. So our next step is to do just like you can see with the first period practice. We take that drawing that has the underlying shapes in the artwork that has the borders, and now you use the variety of pencils to start applying all the different techniques that we learned with the pencil. So let me zoom back out again. All right, so as we look over here, we learned that there are different pencils that do different things better than other pencils do. So when we were drawing the actual underlying shapes and the outlines, contour lines, I asked you to use the HB pencil because it's not too light that you can still see it, but it's not so dark that it smudges and smears when you erase it. Now you get the opportunity to use what pencil you think is most appropriate for the next set of marks that you're doing. And that's where thick and thin, dark and light, rough and smooth come into play. As a matter of fact, I'll go back to my practice one in a second, but you can see that I've already done some blending into the one for first period, right? So I'm just going to go back to this one. Just remember, this should all be done on the big paper with the borders on it. So on this, I can see in my model here, my real bottle, I can see differences in light and dark, and that's what I'm going to try to emulate with my different pencils. I'm going to try to make the dark areas appear dark and the lighter areas appear lighter, keeping in mind that there are some highlights. Highlights are where the light is hitting a surface and bouncing right back to our eyes as brilliantly as it can be. Those highlights, like I see right there, and there's some over on this side too and down below here. Those highlights, I'm going to leave the white of the paper, but it's sometimes easier to darken them in and then use my eraser to pull them back out. Whatever technique you do, you want to make sure you're using an appropriate pencil. So I'm going to use the 3B pencil or the 2B pencil to get myself started, and then I can always go darker if I decide I want to. And I'm using it on its side, and I'm going to put in, I can see the black paper on the other side of it, right? So I'm going to put in that darkness of the black paper, but it's not pure black, so I'm not going to make it look like pure black. And like I said, I'm going to come back with my eraser after I've applied some of this. And I don't want to go too dark too soon, so I just keep, like we did with our practice, we keep applying graphite until it gets to the darkness that you think is appropriate for the work that you're doing. So it's darker right in here than it is here. So I'm just applying it in multiple layers until I get to the darkness that I want. All right? And that darkness continues on this side. So I want to not just focus on one area, I want to develop it in a way that it is meaningful. So the darkness even goes over the tube. By the way, I did the tube when I was doing the contour lines. I can just barely see the tube where the lotion comes up from the bottom into the spigot out of it. And it's a little distorted because of the way it's in the jar and the way the light refracts it, moving it around. It's a little darker right in here on the surface of the liquid, and a little lighter here because there's a sticker on the other side, the label. It's darker here because I see the the black paper through it, and it curves up there onto the shoulder, and it gets darker right in here, but lighter in that area. So I'm going to be using my eraser a lot, okay? So you just build it up gradually. It's still going to be darker in here, right? So I don't want to go too fast with my value building, my dark building. I want to do it in a way that's meaningful and easy for me to change if I need to. On this side, it's darker right in here because I see the black paper on the other side of the bottle, through the bottle, but then there's that label right in here, and it has kind of a meandering edge to it because of the way the light is being bounced around by the curvature of the plastic bottle. So it's a little darker right in there. Here's my label right next to it, but it's still darker than the white paper, right? My label is darker than the white paper. It's kind of blue from what I can see of it. So I just keep applying it. It's really dark, really dark on the label right here in this area. So that means I have to darken it up above the label even more so that there's contrast between the label and the black paper beyond the bottle, okay? Now, if I'm going to be using my eraser, I'm probably going to want to use my tortillon too. My tortillon is used in the same way. I can gently drag that stuff around. I take it right to the edge of the paper, but I don't go outside of it. The edge of my shape, I'm sorry, my form. And I just gently blend it in. One of the problems my beginning students have in art making, one of the most recurring problem, is they over blend. They use this too much, and it creates a big mess, okay? So don't overuse it. Just use it sparingly. Do it where you think you need it, and don't do it more. And don't put pressure on it. The more you press, the more you're going to damage it, and then it's going to push it into the paper, and you're not going to be able to erase it if you decide you need to. I'm going to soften this up just a little bit right here, but I'm going to leave it a little bit rawer where the label is, because it does kind of go in and out in those areas. I'm going to drag it right along the edge of the label this way so that I keep what's called a hard edge that separates the label from the dark area beyond it. So pulling it right along the edge of that label will help to keep that hard edge. And like I said, I'm going to use my eraser to pull out some of the values over here. So I'll do that, and then I'm going to let you guys go to work. Okay? So notice that I've got a contour line that's for the water too. All the contour lines came after the basic shapes were in place. They weren't part of the basic shapes. They were after. So now I'm going to use my eraser, and I'm going to pull out some of the highlights that I actually see. It's really bright right in here. So I'm going to find a clean part of my eraser, and if you don't find one, use the side of your paper to clean up the eraser. Use the edge, get it to a 90-degree angle if you want to by holding it flat, and just cleaning a clean space with your eraser gets rid of all the dirt that's on the eraser. So now I'm going to drag my eraser in there, and I'm going to pull out some of those highlights that I see on the surface of the bottle there. On this side, they're not quite as brilliant, so I'm not going to erase them as much, but they're still there. And they kind of curve this way, not that way so much. So because I got it so wide there, I can come back and I can build my values back around that highlight now. All right? So I'm using the additive method of putting graphite down. I'm moving it around with my tortillon, which is called blending, and then I'm doing the subtractive method with my eraser by pulling out some of the graphite. And that's some of the process that I'm going to be doing. Let's talk about some of these others. So in the bottle itself, I've got some thick lines and some thin lines to show curvature and depth, especially right in here. I could make this a deeper, darker contour line to show that it's closer to me and to show that it's got weight to it. It helps to make that bottle feel heavier. On the back edge, I keep it lighter and not so dark and not so thick. Up at the top, at the front, I can make them darker and thicker, and as they curve around, they can get lighter as they disappear around the corner, right? So thick and thin, dark and light lines, rough and smooth, all of those things help to make it come to life there. When it comes to hatching, we'll talk about that at the next stage. Remember, details are always the last thing you do. I have some details right in here that I drew in last, and they're going to be part of it when I do the surface area too. They'll be on top of it last as darker areas. There's some embossed letters. Now when it comes to this sticker that says moisturizing, I'm just going to put a rectangle right there, right on top of it. As a matter of fact, I could do that immediately, right? So it starts right about here, and it goes across here. And I'm not going to bother writing the words moisturizing in. I'm just going to give it a darker value that is pretty much appropriate for the darkness of the little sticker that's on the label. So I'll come in and I'll darken it up right in front of the other stuff. It's not black, so I'm not going to go too dark. And yeah, I could do all the letters, but why bother, right? That's going to be a lot of detail that I don't really think you want to take that challenge on, and you probably wouldn't do it as well as I would want you to do. So just go for the shape of the space that it's occupying, right? I have some lighter areas within that I can pull back out with my eraser too. So that's the sequence of steps of adding these in. So that's our next steps after. And remember, all of that is actually going on this one that has the built-in frame that you made with the ruler. All right, go to it.